Hi, Paul here. We're going to talk today about prepping for musician sessions. So in this instance, I'm going to talk about going to a studio to record a small string band onto a track that you've prepared. What are the stages you need to go through? So we're going to talk about prepping parts. We're going to talk about the brief, writing a brief, so you know in advance very clearly, and you can share that with the engineer, what you want to get out of the session, any alt takes or anything like that. We're going to talk about preparing a stems session, how you get that from Logic or your DAW to Pro Tools. And then we're going to talk about testing and safety copies. Vitally important when you have a load of musicians turning up and you're going somewhere with your session. You need to take it in multiple different forms. So let's dig straight into the example that I'm going to use. It's a track from my album called Into the Void, and it has some fabulous string players on. So let's see what I did. Okay, so here's the session. As you can see, it's a fairly simple track. There's not loads and loads and loads of stuff going on. And I've prepped my session in such a way that I can stem this very easily. So these are my aux stems that I'm just listening to. And here are my print stems where you can see I've divided this session into 5 different stems. But let's go back to the top and have a look and see what we've got. Now, of my strings, these sections that I've highlighted that appear down here are the things that I'm going to get the live players to play. Everything else is going to come out of the session here. So this stuff is going to go onto my string stem. The things that I'm not going to get the players to play, they can play along to that. And then this stuff here is the stuff that's going to be replaced. So for this string session, for some of the tracks, I had orchestrated the parts into the DAW. So I was using violin ones where the violin ones were playing and so on. This track uses an ensemble pad, but I've been very careful to make sure that I've never have more parts than I have sections. So it's pretty obvious who's playing what. And I used a mixture of Sibelius and staff pad to create my version. I then asked my friend Ben Foskett to have a look over and just tidy up the stuff in Sibelius from my sessions. I sent him the session files as well. And I'll show you what I sent him actually, because I cut down those session files. So it's very, very obvious what Ben's looking at and what he needs to pay attention to. That's important if you're working with an arranger and orchestrator. You want to make sure that it's very clear to them what they're looking at. Now, one of the things you can do in this tidied up session is to go through and quantize things. But to be honest, unless you're dealing with very, very complex music, if it's something you can clearly hear what the intention is, and maybe a few of these notes might start just before the bar line, it's not going to frighten your orchestrator, but it is going to take a little bit of extra time. So it's really down to whether you have the time to do it at your end, or whether you're going to just ask them, say, everything's played unquantized, but obviously you can hear from the MP3 you send them what the intention is. So then I'd get those Sibelius files back from Ben, and then I printed them out myself. When you're printing parts, you just need to make sure that the stave is large enough for the player to be able to see, and again at a slight distance for the basses, for example. And just make sure that everything's nice and clear, but it's pretty straightforward. Make sure there's no awkward page turns. Bind your pages together using paper tape so that they're concertina, very easy to navigate, and you don't get someone trying to turn a page and then everything scatters across the floor. So there's a lot of common sense, but let's go back to this. So what are the things that I'm not getting the string players to play? Well, anything which I think is very, very close to the end and is something that's not going to benefit massively from being replayed. You know, if you've got super high harmonics that just go across a certain section and the strings are doing other things as well, then in that instance, you might as well just leave the harmonics in. There were some special effects that I used in here from the Hans Zimmer strings. So here, for example, I'm using the viola's tremolo harmonic waves, and I've got these cellos, and again I'm using a tremolo harmonic wave. So I'm using a couple of special effects from there, and then I've got a low doubling of the basses, which I'm using the Abbey Road 1 legendary low legato strings, which are in octaves, and it's really just to give that kind of really lovely underneath kind of solidness, because I only had two two live basses in my band. And then I'm using at one point a sub bass, which you can clearly hear when you listen to the track. It's doing its thing there. And then I've got my live strings that I've brought back in here when I'm mixing. But we're not going to talk about mixing today. That's for a later video. So that's all of my strings. Everything, as you can see, nicely arranged. Now, everything else, it's not hugely detailed and complicated, but there's some timps there from the Hans Zimmer percussion. I've used a little bit of, as a kind of ostinato up high there, the harp swarm. And again, it's very, very straightforward. It's very simple. It's just playing. It's that harmonic pluck, really, really beautiful. And I'm just using the outriggers, so I'm really placing that back into the room. So I've used symphonic organ. So as a organist in my youth, played the organ in Worcester Cathedral a lot, and I love the sound of the organ. It's just part of my musical makeup. So I use it wherever I can. And here, it's just that beautiful kind of soft diapason kind of sound. So it's that lovely fluty sound, and I've used that as a significant part of the kind of rhythmic motivation at the end of the track. I've got a little wine glass that I made in the studio. With a ton of effects on. That just has a little ping every so often. And then finally, these xylophones, 3 players, super close mics from Percussion Swarm. So you can hear it's taking all these sounds and giving them as much character as possible, and just using the beautiful kind of fragility of them. This whole thing is this kind of icy landscape, loneliness, this kind of void, into the void. So we got a couple of sounds from these wonderful synths. We've got the Yuhi Repro 1, and then I've got this fabulous sound from Phobos, one of my own design sounds, which I've tweaked a tiny bit. But yeah, basically love Phobos, got some great stuff in there. Just such a huge amount of character. And as you can see, if you look at my automation in here, I'm really automating it a lot and bringing it in and out of the track, just to add to the kind of overall movement and dynamic and, you know, shifting feeling across the whole thing. So that's all the stuff that's there. Now, what I've done then is I've bounced that down to my stems. My print stems, which are here. So you can see we've got the string stem, timps, harps, keys and synths. It's really about making sure that you've got enough stems and the things are separated out that the musicians might want more or less of independently. And it's giving the recordist enough control that they can give the musicians the best chance of giving you a great take. So you don't want... There's no point doing too many, because you'll end up with something that's as complicated to navigate as your overall session. But so you want to try and simplify as much as possible, but have the things that really need to be separated off. If you've got something where you want the musicians to hear, for example, the strings, you want them to hear the thing that they're going to play, then I would put that down separately to the things that you're going to keep in the session at the end. So anything that's going to be replaced, have that on a separate stem. And if you want the musicians to hear it. If you don't, then that's fine, and you just want to give them the parts, and all the information is contained within the parts and your explanation to them before each take, then that's perfect as well. In this case, I'd spoken to the engineer, Isabel Gracefield, before going to rack, and sent her the Pro Tools sessions so that we knew we're in a good place. And one thing that's really probably very obvious, but let's just state it anyway: make sure that all of your stems start exactly on a bar, that you know exactly what bar that is. They're all consistent. And also I always bounce a click track as well. And to do that, you just mute everything, stick your click on, and off you go, bounce to disk. So I just bounce an audio file of the click from Logic, and then I know that I've got something as a backup, and also to help me line things up if I need to in Pro Tools. But I'll put all of these as stereo tracks into Pro Tools, make sure that my tempo map is the same, and you can export a MIDI file to get the tempo map from Logic to Pro Tools if the tempo is changing a lot. So that's all fairly straightforward. Here's what my Pro Tools session file looks like. Again, very, very straightforward. And people might say, well, why are you doing that? Why don't you just record it into Logic? Well, apart from the fact that you don't want to be, taking your drives and all that, it just introduces so much more stuff that can go wrong. And if you don't need to access your programming, all your virtual instruments, all that stuff during the session, then just take the simplest thing you can. A simple, in this case, Pro Tools file with 5 stems and a click track. Super easy. In Pro Tools is, I find, the easiest program to record audio into. So it means that if you're controlling the rig as well, you've got something. It's also very simple for the engineers. Everybody uses Pro Tools in every major recording studio that I've ever been in anyway. And it just means that you can easily create new tracks. All of that kind of stuff is just so simple, and it saves so much time in the session. When you've got musicians sitting there, you're spending your money. You don't want them sitting there waiting for you to sort stuff out in the session file. So if I pull that down, if we go back to our kind of initial section here, let's boost that so you can see. So you can follow along with the MIDI here and see what I've done. I'll just play the opening of this track, and then we'll come back to this track and I'll show you what I've done with the mix as well. But that's kind of beyond the scope of this video. But I'll just play you a quick blast at the beginning. Okay, so you get the idea. You can hear where the stuff that I've muted, so the Waves track here from Olafur's Chamber Ensembles, which has been replaced by the live stuff, and I'm also doubling up some of these elements on the Frozen Strings track as well to just get that beautiful combination of kind of live and samples. And for example, here where the basses come in, let's just check that out and you can see exactly what's going on here. And if I turn off the legendary low strings, and back on. So you can hear it's giving me that extra bit of sub, a little bit more of a solid bottom than I was getting with my live band, where I could only afford 2 basses, fabulous as they were. So the final thing just to say at the end, into going back to what I said at the beginning about testing and safety copies, I save down, I copy over, I consolidate sessions, I open up my my sessions that I'm going to be taking to the studio on a different machine. I do all kinds of tests before I get there, because the one thing you don't want to happen is you don't want to get to the studio and realize you haven't got something because one audio file was still being linked from somewhere else. I always send the engineer the sessions that I've prepped in advance of the recording date, so that they're able to open up the session as well and just become familiar with it, have a quick listen, and know that everything is there ready to go. And I usually stick, as a kind of third super redundant backup, I put things in Dropbox. So I know that even if I get there and I've had my bag stolen and the drive is gone, I can log into Dropbox and download the sessions from there. So multiple layers of redundancy. It's very important to get all of this preparation. Yes, it takes a little bit longer, but it just means that you're not going to end up in a situation where you are spending money on players and they don't have anything to play. So I hope that was useful. In the next video in this series of Making Your Album, we're going to look at the mix. So I'm going to show you a couple of different mixes, how I've approached things, what effects I'm using, what I'm using on the master bus, what I'm leaving for mastering and what I wouldn't leave for mastering, so that kind of approach as well. And also how I've mixed a track that is live strings only, and how I've treated the different mics and all that kind of stuff. So look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye for now.